Hey all, welcome to this review for your Unit 5 quiz that you got tomorrow. I'm just going to go through the review guide that I gave you and kind of walk you through my thinking problem as I would do each of these problems. I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. Of course, if you've got any questions, email me or call me or text me or whatever. So let's go through these multiple choice ones first. What we have here is a production possibilities frontier. Sometimes you'll see these where it talks about like consumption goods versus capital goods, and of course if you invest more in capital goods, that's machinery, and that might in the future lead to more production. But when we're talking missiles or steel, they're just two goods. And so as I'm reading this, which of the following would cause the production possibilities curve to shown above to shift outward? Well, if we decide to produce more steel or produce more missiles instead, neither of those is going to give me an increase in production. So C and D don't actually make sense. A and B really refer to a point inside the curve. If I was at point A, well then reopening steel plants would get me back to my full production capacity, or rehiring laid off steel workers might get me back to my full production capacity, but it's not going to increase my future production abilities. So the only one that makes sense is here is E. If we develop more efficient steel making processes, yeah, that would allow me to potentially produce more in the future. Number 15. To protect high-cost domestic producers, a country imposes a tariff on an imported commodity. Why? So call this like wheat or sugar. Which of the following is most likely to occur in the short run? Well, if you put a tax on it, that means people are not going to buy imported, foreign sugar or foreign Y, and so that's not going to decrease domestic production. In the short run, it's going to actually try to increase production because we're no longer buying it elsewhere. We're buying it from people who produce it in the U.S. or in whatever country we're in. As for the foreign output, well, they're no longer able to sell it in this country, and so they're likely to produce less as well. So the only answer that makes sense here is 2 only. Suppose 2 countries are each capable of individually producing 2 given commodities. Instead, each specializes by producing the commodity for which it has a comparative advantage and then trades with the other country for which of the following is most likely the result? Well, if they're trading because it'll make both countries better off. And you saw in that example in class that if we specialize in trade, both parties have the possibility of landing at a point that's outside their production possibilities curve. That's the beauty and the magic of comparative advantage. All right, if the United States interest rates cause foreign demand for the dollar to increase, which of the following will occur to the international value of the dollar and to United States exports? Let's start with the first part there. If more people demand the dollar, well, that's going to increase the value of the dollar. So let's get rid of those two. And if we have an increased value of the dollar, well, that's great for people in the U.S. who have U.S. dollars to buy stuff. But if you are selling your stuff and hoping to get paid in U.S. dollars, like U.S. exporters are, then that expensive dollar makes it harder for you to sell it, and so we're actually going to see a decrease in exports. This one is a little bit tricky. You will likely see a couple of these problems on your macroecon exam as well. But notice that this is labor hours. The table indicates the number of labor hours required to produce food or clothing in each of the countries. I like to think of opportunity cost, which is what we're going to have to calculate, as what you give up over what you get. And if we're looking at this is how much time, not how much I get. So I'm just going to arbitrarily choose 100 hours and say, oh, how many could I produce? Well, in 100 hours I could produce 5 food, or I could produce the clothing, I could produce 2 clothing. Country Y could produce 10 food or 5 clothing. So country Y has the absolute advantage in both food and clothing. But we probably want to figure out who has the comparative advantage, so we'll do that. What do you give up over what you get? So the opportunity cost for food for country X, they give up 2 clothing to get 5 food, equals 0.4. Country Y, they give up 5 to get 10, that equals 0.5, and this looks like the lower opportunity costs. So country X has a comparative advantage in food production. Of course, the reciprocal is true for the clothing, so it'd be 5 over 2 equals 2.5, and here 10 over 5 equals 2, and that's the lower opportunity cost. So country Y has the comparative advantage in producing clothing, and that correct answer is C. Lastly, the multiple choice, if the Federal Reserve undertakes a policy to reduce interest rates. Well, if we reduce interest rates, here's that money market. They're going to do that by, here's the demand for money, here's the supply of money, and of course they're going to reduce interest rates by increasing the money supply. And what that changes is the nominal interest rate. And that's going to lower that nominal interest rate. In the long run, the real interest rate might adjust, but in the short run, that lower interest rate is going to discourage people from investing in the U.S. So in the short run, capital inflows to the United States will decrease. Now on to the short answer. All right, short answer are fun. Again, I'm just going to kind of walk through my thinking of these things. It's a little bit off the cuff, so I hope it works for you, but here we have Japan, the EU, Canada, and Mexico, and they all have flexible exchange rates. So part A, let's suppose Japan attracts an increased amount of investment from the European Union using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market. Okay, loanable funds. And this is the loanable funds market in Japan. We're going to have a demand for loanable funds and a supply of loanable funds. That was our initial supply, so that's our initial quantity, and this is the interest rate, the real interest rate. So I've got my labels there. Let's see, where was I? Let's see, show the effect of the increase in foreign investment on the real interest rate in Japan. Well, if there is more investment, that means there's a bigger supply of loanable funds. People are wanting to invest in Japan, so we have an increase in the supply of money being lent for investors, so that's going to drive down the interest rates. Real interest rates fall. Let me just label those things correctly. There we go. Part 2 then. Part 2. How will real... Let's see, I'll just write that over here. Part 2. How will real interest rates change in Japan that I identified here, them falling, affect the employment level in Japan? Well, if interest rates are falling, investment and consumption of interest-sensitive things like cars. People take out loans to buy cars, so if you have a lower interest rate, people buy more cars. So interest-sensitive goods will increase with the lower interest rate. And I'm just going to abbreviate right now. You should probably write it out a little bit better than that. Thus, aggregate demand will increase, causing employment levels to increase. Or you could say for unemployment to decrease. All right, part B. I got to go back up and read the question here a second. Part B. Suppose in a different part of the world the real interest rate in Canada increases relative to that in Mexico. Okay, well that makes me think more people are going to want to invest in Canada because they have higher interest rates, which means people are going to want more Canadian dollars. So let's see, using a correctly labeled graph for the Canadian dollar, show the effect of the change in the real interest rate in Canada on the international value of the Canadian dollar expressed as Mexican pesos per dollar. Well, alright, so we've got demand and supply. I should label this as quantity of Canadian dollars, and this is the price of it expressed as pesos per Canadian dollar. And we have an initial exchange rate. I'll label it 0. I don't think I actually need to label the quantity there, but again, now more people are wanting to invest. More people are wanting to invest in Canada because of those high interest rates. So the demand for Canadian dollars is going to increase, which means that exchange rate is going to increase. So the value of Canadian dollar increases. Let's see. Part 2 then, how will the change in the international value of the Canadian dollar that we identified in part 1 affect Canadian exports to Mexico? Well, the Canadian dollars are more expensive. So because the Canadian dollar has increased relative to the peso, and you should probably write that, relative to the peso, that makes Canadian goods and services more expensive. Canadian goods and services, because they want to get paid in Canadian dollars, are more expensive. So Canadian exports decrease. Good. And I think that is it for that question. So let's jump on to question number 3. Question number 3, a United States firm sells $10 million worth of goods to a firm in Argentina where the currency is the peso. How will the above transaction, or the transaction above, affect Argentina's aggregate demand? Well, if the people in Argentina are buying them from the U.S., that is actually, remember, aggregate demand is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports, or exports minus imports. So if imports increase, net exports, a component of aggregate demand, a part of aggregate demand decreases, a component of aggregate demand decreases. So aggregate demand is decreasing. Right, as we're buying stuff from the US instead of from stuff that's produced in Argentina, we're decreasing the total demand of goods produced in Argentina because we bought them from the U.S. All right, assume that the United States current account balance with Argentina is initially zero. That would imply that the exports minus imports is at zero there. How will the transaction above affect the United States current account balance? Explain. Well, if the exports are now greater than imports, greater than, I'll just write it like exports are greater than imports. So there's more transactions in the current account there, which is exports and imports. There's more stuff that's happening in U.S. dollars that are being purchased in U.S. dollars than are being bought in other currencies. So we have a credit. Exports are now greater than imports, so the current account is in surplus. Because the exports are recorded as a credit. Because exports are recorded as a credit. All right. So again, remember the difference there between credit and debit. It's basically if it's being done in our country's currency, in the United States currency, then it's a credit. So exports are a credit to us, to our current account. If it's being done in another currency, then it's a then it is a debit. Sorry, brain fart there for a second. All right, part C. Using a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the United States dollar. I'm just going to stop there for a second. We saw this graph in the last problem, so I'm just going to draw it again. This is U.S. dollars, so we're looking at the quantity of U.S. dollars, and we're expressing it. Now let me just draw my demand and supply, and we're expressing it in terms of pesos, the number of pesos. Oops, there we go. Peso. How many pesos does it cost per U.S. dollar? That was a horrible S. Let me try that again. There we go. And we have an initial exchange rate. We'll just call that E0. All right, then what does the rest of the question say? Show how a decrease in the United States financial investment in Argentina affects each of the following. What we have there is people in the United States don't want to invest in Argentina, so we do not want to exchange our dollars to Argentinian pesos. There are fewer people willing to exchange the money because we don't need it to invest in Argentina. We don't want to. So the supply of U.S. dollars is going to decrease, which is going to cause an increase in the value of the U.S. dollar relative to the peso. So USD appreciates relative to the peso. Did we answer the full question? What happens to the supply of U.S. dollars? Oh, I should probably say that. Well, I showed it. the supply decreased and the value of the US dollar appreciated. All right, lastly, this one, oh nuts. This one initially threw me a little bit, and I maybe got 1 of 2 points on it the first time I did it. So let me hopefully explain it a little better this time. Suppose that the inflation rate is 3% in the United States and 5% in Argentina. What will happen to the value of the peso relative to the United States dollar as a result of the difference in inflation rates? One way to think about this, and the way I initially did, was, well, the peso is losing value faster than the United States dollar, so it must be depreciating in value. And that was my logic, and that's sound, and it'll probably get you 1 of 2 points. But probably a more thorough, complete answer is that if we say there is inflation, what we really mean is that the price level is increasing. So because the price level, and I'm just going to initial that with PL, because the price level is increasing more rapidly in Argentina, because that price level is rising more rapidly in Argentina, U.S. goods are becoming cheaper by comparison. If the price level of Argentinian made goods is rising, that is the definition of inflation. Because the price level is increasing more rapidly in Argentina, that means U.S. goods are actually looking a little bit more affordable compared to those higher prices of the Argentinian goods. U.S. goods are so what we're going to end up doing, so Argentinians will end up wanting to buy more U.S. goods, which means they are going to need U.S. dollars. So I don't know how to write that out exactly, other than say Argentinians will demand more U.S. dollars to buy U.S. goods. So, So, I hate this sentence. This is a run-on sentence. You can word it better than I am right now. I told you it's stream of conscience here. Here, I'll do that period, and I'll do it like this. Here we go. That'll sound right. As a result, we could say it either way. The U.S. dollar will appreciate, or the Argentinian dollar will depreciate, but I think, or the Argentinian peso, but it wants me to say it that way, because it says what will happen to the value of the peso relative to the dollar. As a result, I could just say both parts. The U.S. dollar will appreciate, and the peso will depreciate. I should spell that right, huh? The peso will depreciate. All right. I think I've answered those questions thoroughly. I hope as you watch this, you can follow my stream of conscience. If you get stuck on something and are going like, I have no idea what he just said, probably the best way to reach me would be a text. So 616-901-3205, and this video is going up on YouTube, but I don't think anybody who isn't in the class is going to spend enough time watching this video to find my number to text me, or at least I hope not. But there's my number if you want to reach me. Send me a text, ask me your question, whatever you need. And I'm going to erase that number. Not that that helps at all, because you could have paused the video. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Have a good night.